to students who will be on rotations next month in Ramadan. I mean, it's a very difficult time for students in general, and if you're on rotations as well, it's a new set of difficulties that unfortunately when I went through it, I just kind of did it by myself and didn't really have any guidance going through it. So I found that helping out the next generation coming up would be something really beneficial. And then also this would be a little bit of advice for students that haven't started yet, because I know Scholl gets out there early and a lot of schools are starting to come out. By show of hands, how many students are out right now on rotations or not out on rotations? All right. So we moving on the presentation, if this will. So the biggest thing with fasting and being on rotations is suhoor is extremely important. I mean, before I went out on rotations, I would just kind of skip suhoor more or less. But I quickly found that I was crashing extremely early on in the day, and wherever you are, it makes it really difficult because if you crash really early in the day and you're at a surgically heavy program, you're kind of not really well prepared for uh, the afternoon. And if you have afternoon cases, you know your attendings are asking you questions and things like that. So during my research and what I found while I was out was that it's important to eat really clean and simple if possible. So I stopped eating whatever my mom was making. I didn't eat anything really salty, really high in fats, because one, I felt really bloated after suhoor, and that grogginess kind of carried throughout the day, and I just kind of felt like in a brain fog. And the salt, you kind of retain a lot of water, and same kind of effect. And then in the simple carbs, you have your spike in sugars, and then you crash. I found the best options to be fruits, complex carbs, so a lot of brown rice. I don't like eating too heavy of a suhoor, so I kept it relatively light, and I hydrated a lot. Protein's a great way to stay full for long periods of time, but suhoor is going to only last you a while. You just kind of got to get through the day, and the biggest thing is going to be the acclimation. Definitely in the beginning, it's going to be hard, kind of regardless of what you do. But inshallah, this kind of makes that plateau a lot easier, trying to get acclimated to your schedule. The biggest challenge for me, especially, is that I kind of drive off coffee. And for me, the biggest thing was kind of not dealing with the caffeine headaches, because um, my body's so acclimated to it. If I don't drink coffee for more than like a day and a half, I get these really bad headaches. So kind of working that around, there's not really any good alternative to coffee. My biggest advice is that honestly, depending on where you're going to be at, I had a 6:30 call time every day for where I was at, and so where for me kind of ended around 5:55. So I would kind of wake up, drink a cup of coffee, have two dates, and then just kind of go to my hospital. So that kind of really helped. But the downside of that is that I would really crash really hard after 2, 3 p.m., but most of my days ended at 4, so I could kind of last until I got home. So that is kind of dependent. Each individual schedule from every hospital site is going to be incredibly different. So you kind of really have to know what's going to work for you, and it's going to require some tailoring as the month goes on. But these are some of the some tips that you can take with you to make that transition a bit easier. Um, does anyone have any questions? All right. Next slide, inshallah. Yeah, so this is more of like just in general in terms of advice for kids who aren't out yet and students who are out right now, is that it's really a human game when you're on rotations. What I found is that people aren't programs aren't really looking for individuals who are the smartest individuals. They're looking for people we can spend the next 3 years with. I mean, I've had faculty tell me that, but really is shocking to see how many kids go out on rotations and they just like lack the social awareness, and they just have like pretty bad decorum when they're out. You know, don't take phone calls in front of attendings and residents. You know, kind of especially personal phone calls, things like that. You know, don't bring out personal problems out in front of the office and things like that. People aren't really interested. What they're really interested in seeing is someone who is a good work, has a good work ethic, is a likable individual. They're easygoing. You know, if they say there's something is, if someone asks you something and you give them an answer and they're not happy with it, you know, don't fight them on it. You know, I've seen residents who have unfortunately, you know, been asked to change programs because, you know, they always have to be right. And you know, it doesn't matter if you're a student or a resident. If you can't really take no for an answer, you're going to have a problem. Most programs aren't looking for individuals that are extremely competent. They're just looking for people who, at the end of the day, as a student, that aren't going to hurt their patients. You know, that really just starts with the most basic of things, and that's going to be your nail care. If you can debride nails without, you know, making the patient bleed, and then you can answer a few questions with that, you're pretty much like competing from the high ground. You know, from there, that point on, you know, if a program really likes you, they'll start giving you more and more responsibilities. And as a student, it doesn't seem like that. It just seems like you're doing grunt work. But if they're trusting you enough to do grunt work where they're not watching you, that means they trust you enough that, you know, they're not going to hurt their patients. I've had residents tell me that they can't leave a room when students are doing dressing changes because they don't trust them enough. So if you can do that and be likable at the same time, you're competing with the small sect of people for that program, because a lot of students, it's shocking, but they can't do all of that. Attitude goes a long way. Having good attitude when it comes into the office really does make a good program notice you. And then teachable. If you don't know something, that's completely okay. But I would follow up. If you don't know something, to say, I don't know right now, but I can look it up and get back to you. That something is not a lot of people do. A lot of students will say that, but residents won't follow up on that, and attendings don't bother enough to ask you. That doesn't mean they forgot that you didn't know something. They just know that this student either didn't have enough motivation to look it up or forgot themselves. And that's not a good look. At one program, I was told that I was one of two kids in a residence 3 years of the time being there, that I was the second student that only ever looked something up and got back to them. So definitely it's a lot of kids say it, but not a lot of kids do it. And doing it is a great way to separate yourself. Time off. When I went at Scholl, you know, they said, you know, it's not a good look to take time off, and I'm here to say that I've never had that experience. Honestly, if a program tells you, it's like, why are you taking time off? That's probably a greater indicator of the culture of the program, and that's probably not the healthiest program to be at, because you don't want to be at a program for 3 years where you're going to be burnt out and miserable and you're afraid to ask your bosses for PTO for whatever reasons. I took both Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr off and had no issues with it. Completely okay. You just want to give programs plenty of time in advance. I usually give them like a week and a half to 2 weeks of notice. I took family weddings off, religious holidays and everything like that should not be a problem at all. And programs usually you don't deal with program directions themselves. You usually just deal with the first year or second year resident who deals with all that kind of paperwork. And honestly, if you guys have paperwork through your school where they require you to fill it out, most residents may or may not even do that. So you may or may not have to report back anything to your school as well. How to be helpful. The biggest advice I got before I left was anticipate needs. The biggest way to separate yourself is to be really helpful at a program. And the way to do that is kind of anticipate the needs of whatever person you're working with, whether it's a resident or an attending or an MA for some reason. If they're debriding a wound, you know they're probably going to need a gauze pack. Just open up a gauze pack and have it ready for them. Because the more that you're helpful for them without stepping on their toes, that's the part of knowing where the line is, the more fondly they'll remember you. Because you know, as a student, your job is to be helpful. When I kind of went out, my first month out, I didn't spend a lot of time in the OR, and when I went in there, I thought that I'd be given I'd be given the opportunity to suture. But as time went on, toward the end of my first year of being out, I came to realize that, you know, as a student, your job is not to do, you're not being able to do all those cool things. You know, your job is just to mainly learn, observe, and, you know, determine whether or not if that's a good program for you as a resident. You know, as a student, you'll be lucky if you get to do like an amputation during one of your electives. At core sites, you're mainly there just to help clinic move along. At your electives is where you're going to be given most of your latitude in terms of ability to participate in things. But mainly across the entire board, your main job is just to observe and learn as much as you can, because that will kind of help you the most in when it comes to starting residency. And when you're on your electives, the biggest thing that they're going to remember is how helpful was this individual, and how much of a good attitude did they have when they were working with us. In terms of instruments to keep on hand, I recommend only just to keep bandage scissors. In my entire time out, I've never needed anything else. A good pair of bandage scissors will go a long way. Most people don't carry bandage scissors, and if they know you as a person that's well prepared when getting teeth on dressings, you'll be separating yourself from the pack. And keep a pen with you as well. I give my pen out every day to residents and attendings because they don't have themselves. One piece of advice is that I would keep burner pens with you, pens that you want to keep just to give out, because you may not get it back. Um, and that's completely okay if you have burner pens like the Mattel pens or whatnot. Don't give them out your nice pens, because sometimes they may forget. They're not keeping it intentionally. They're just forgetting it to give back to you. And I didn't. You may not be comfortable enough asking them to get it back. Don't hide from work. I was at a program and they mentioned to me that students from my school would kind of disappear to the bathroom, quote unquote, when clinic got really busy. Once or twice is fine, but, you know, people are always watching, and they are always kind of, you know, stacking you against all the other students that have come beforehand. If they kind of put a pattern on you of skipping work or going to the bathroom when things get really busy, you know, it's kind of really hard thing to shake, because you only have so much time to leave impression. And if the impression you kind of leave from the beginning is that, you know, when clinic gets really busy, you kind of take 20-30 minutes in the bathroom or whatnot, you know, it makes that program really you're kind of fighting you're fighting the odds on that one, because programs really don't really want to give you the benefit of the doubt, because they already have so many other candidates and whatnot. Um, yeah, if you love the program, let them know. Programs will remember students who stay in touch after they leave. Simple as that. You know, if you love a program, at the end of the month, let them know, hey, I really liked your program. I really learned a lot. Thank the residents you worked with, because your PGY ones that you work with at the beginning will be your PGY twos, and, you know, those guys will be your chiefs. So if you have a good relationship with them when you leave your rotation, and if you end up as a resident there, that relationship is kind of already kind of built for you to step in and kind of expand on. So that's a great way to kind of build that relationship. And as time goes on, programs will if you especially go out early in the cycle, it's really difficult for programs to remember who every student was and what their traits were. But if you stayed in touch with them, they'll remember that, hey, we really like this person, and they kept coming back to our academic sessions. And they even visited us once or twice after they left. And, you know, visiting programs is kind of difficult depending on, you know, are they really far away from you? What time of year are you visiting, and things like that. There are a lot of factors that go into visiting a program, but if they have academics online and you can join, that's the easiest way. And and not a lot of kids do that as well. So if you really like the program, just stay in touch with them after you leave. And then closer to interviews, yeah, visiting is a great way to stay in touch. And then if you develop those relationships with those residents, it's a great way to figure out, you know, what they may ask you during interviews. You know, they're not going to tell you exactly what's going to be there, but they can give you an idea of what to expect during your interview cycle and whatnot. Now, resources to know going out, the Prism manual and Crozers are great things to have on hand. They have PDF versions available as well as print versions available. Prisms is a great way to get a great overview of all things podiatry. Crozers is a great factoid book. It's going to be a great resource for you if you're going to be at a PIMP-heavy program. Watkins is a great overall, almost like a great synopsis of year 1 and 2 of podiatry school. And that I think is really useful when it comes to studying for part 2. But that's a whole other topic. When it comes to surgical knowledge, especially when you're prepping for surgery cases and whatnot, Coughlin and Mann I found is I like Coughlin and Mann a lot better than, say, McGlamry. McGlamry tends to have a lot of research for it and a lot of anecdotal things in their chapter, but Coughlin and Mann really kind of gets to the bread and butter of things about like what to look for, anatomic landmarks, post-op care, things like that. And things like that, if you can talk to your residents and your attendings about that after a case, and you can kind of have that conversation like almost like a resident, like a pseudo resident, you know, you're going to start separating yourself from a student, because you're not only just answering questions about anatomy, like what every student should know, but you're going to be talking to them about like, hey, can this patient weight bear post-op, or what's their post-op protocol looking like at 2 weeks, 4 weeks, you know, questions like a resident will ask. You know, they'll start seeing you in a different light, seeing that, you know, this student's thinking at a higher level comparative to the rest of the other students, you know. So using these types of resources are a great way to start to separate yourself. In surgery, you know, succeeding when you're in surgery, that it's scrubbing into your cases when you're first out, it's extremely nerve-wracking. For me, it was I was at a really busy surgical program when I first got out, and you know, when it got really busy, I would find myself just kind of moving toward the back wall, and I would have to be repeatedly called back into the surgical field because, you know, C-arms are coming in. There are a lot of people. You have reps that are scrubbed in. You may have a fellow at your program that you're at, and then you may have a resident and the attending. So no, those are like 5-6 people that are scrubbed in that one area. And you know, the foot and ankle is not a lot of real estate when you're operating, and there's like 5-6 people in that one small area. So as a student, and you know, you're worried about not breaking surgical feet, you don't want to break sterile technique as a student. So you know, don't be afraid of breaking sterile technique, but be aware of what sterile technique is. You know, keep your hand on a patient, you know, from, you know, this is a little vulgar, but you know, one MA told me, you know, nip to nave. That's where you're sterile. You want to keep your hands when you're scrubbed in. You know, don't reach for lights until they're all, you know, they have covers on them and things like that. You know, don't be too overzealous when you first get in the OR. You know, just kind of, you know, you got to crawl before you walk, and you got to walk before you learn how to run. So just kind of do things in progression, and it's completely okay to be nervous. And, you know, talk to your scrub tech, talk to the staff and faculty in the ORs, and they'll be more than happy to help you. So when you first get started, it's definitely a learning curve, but once you learn it, you'll be going in no time. And the succeeding clinic, you know, talking about almost developing into a resident type of mindset, you know, working on developing your assessment and plan. That's the biggest way to separate yourself in a clinic environment from other students, because most students will kind of be focusing on history and physical. But if you can talk to them about history and physical and think about what your assessment and plan is for the patient, you know, that kind of thing. Most kids are thinking about steps 1 and 2, but you're also doing 1, 2, and thinking about 3 and 4. So that's a great way to separate yourself in a clinic environment. Because most attendings will notice that, like, hey, this kid is actually giving, you know, reasonable assessments and reasonable plans for things. And then, you know, they're also suggesting labs to order and imagings to consider. And again, you know, if an attending says, no, we're doing this, just say, yeah, completely fine. But can you tell me why? Like, you know, what did I miss for you to make that type of decision? You know, that in itself is a learning opportunity. And if you look at that people, programs love students who want to learn, because those types of students will make great residents. And then those residents, because being a doctor is like lifelong learning, it literally never stops. If you finish part two, and then you have to take part three, and then, there's your in training exams, and then you have, those exams never stop. And if you're just a learner all the time, it's a good behavior to have. And then, succeeding on rounds, being efficient and being helpful on rounds is also really helpful. Usually, they happen early in the morning, and everyone's kind of groggy. It's at 6 a.m. Best way to be prepared for that is, have a lot of know who's on the list, know what they're there for. Most of the time it's a lot of dressing changes. Make sure you have enough Curlex and gauze and betadine with you, and then keep your bandage scissors, because hospitals don't have that on hand. And keep suture removal kits. Just be aware of what they need. If they're doing dressing wounds, know what they want. And then being good with dressing up wounds and things like that. You'll get better with all your skills as time goes on throughout the year. So you don't have to be, A1 from day one, but you have to be willing to learn from your mistakes and get better. That's only what programs want. No one's expecting you to be perfect when you get out there. But just learning from every mistake and opportunity. Back in March of last year, I inadvertently stuck myself with a needle, and I learned from that mistake. It's extremely scary when it happens the first time, but then you learn from that. You're always aware where sharps are now in the future and things like that. So always using any opportunity to get better and learn is basically how you are a good student. And being this is like a Muslim network, I think about this hadith every time I go out when seeing patients. The compassionate ones who are mercy has mercy on those who are merciful, and show mercy to those who are on the earth. He is in the web and will show you mercy to you. Make the intentions of when you're treating patients. You're doing this for to show mercy on the patient. And you're doing this for the pleasure of Allah. And at the end of the day, whatever you do will turn into ajr for you, and that's all you can do. But I can take any questions if anyone has any.
So Luqmaan, I don't have a question per se. This is Junaid Khan, by the way. I'm an attending in Buffalo, New York. I don't have a question per se, but just some comments as someone who's obviously been through rotations while fasting, residency while fasting, and attending while fasting, and kind of being with students and residents on the other side of the important thing is, as a student, you really don't want Ramadan to be like an excuse. For example, like I remember when I was for like 8 hours that day, and I was fasting, and by like 6 p.m. I was, you know, close to my fast breaking and making iftar. I could barely retract, and I was struggling, right? And I never told him I was fasting, right? And he just joked at the end. He's like, "Did you not eat all day? Like, why are you struggling? You're usually fine." And I told him, like, you know what, doc, like I actually am fasting today. And he's like, "Oh wow, I'm so impressed. I didn't know how you do it." That's kind of the attitude you want to carry into rotations and residency, honestly. You never want Ramadan to be an excuse while you're a student. You don't want people to, remember like, oh, that was the guy that was fasting who was struggling, right? As a Muslim who's fasting, you're supposed to fast with humility, with grace, with the right attitude. I'm obviously Muslim myself, and it would annoy me when Muslim students would say, "Oh, I'm fasting. Can I skip clinic today?" Or just constantly reminding everyone that they're fasting. Like no one wants to be around that person, right? So although obviously people may, you know, make things easy for you, just let them know that this is just another day. I'm okay. I can do this, right? So that's just something I want, you know, every student here and everyone who's about to be a resident to kind of carry forward. Just Ramadan is obviously Ramadan. Don't be ashamed if you're in the OR and it's time for iftar to say, "Hey, can I break scrub?" and just have a date or have a sip of water and come back. No one's going to say anything. And you'll notice that people will really respect what you're doing, right? They'll be interested in it. But at the same time, just, it's just another day at work. Eventually you'll get used to it and you'll be fine.
Great point. Aisha, you had a question?
Hi, assalamualaikum. Yeah, my name is Aisha. I'm a third year at Temple. My question was, how do you suggest that we study during like rotations and fasting? Studying for like externships, going over Prism, Crozier, Anki, all that stuff. On top of rotations, getting home late, having a commute home. So how do you balance both?
That's a great question. I think it really depends on program. Like, what do you study for, like part two? Because if it's a little early for that, honestly. If you're just studying for cases and whatnot, just reviewing what type of cases you have coming up in the week and just preparing for that would be more than enough.
I was more so studying because next month I'll be on internal medicine rotation, but also just staying on top of internal medicine stuff, as well as studying like podiatry, like Prism and stuff. So trying to do both.
I think for something like that, that would be for IM. I think it really depends on the site you're at, like how much responsibility are you being given. I know for my school, all of our different IM tracks at different levels of responsibility. So we either had to do a lot or very little. And I think for Croziers and Prism, the thing is like with Anki, like if you don't do those cards every day, they tend to add up a lot. But if you find that you have time in between like cases or in clinic and whatnot, the books just are pretty small. The Crozier's book can fit in your white coat, and you can just kind of read it during then. The Ankis, I have Anki decks for them. I can send them out if you like, but they're like 800 plus, and you know how Anki works. If you don't do them, they kind of pile up. So it's a double-edged sword in that regard.
Got it. Thank you.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. And I've noticed this with students at different programs. When you have downtime, I let everybody else chime in as well that's finished, no longer a student or finishing residency or new attending, because typically what is the thought is when we see people on their phones, people usually talk. Even if you are doing work or doing those Anki cards, I think it's a better look for you to have Prism or have any physical document, even if you're just kind of glancing at it and not super into it. It's one thing if you're doing that, and it's another thing when you see somebody that's just constantly scrolling reels, and to most people that just says that I don't really want to be here. I'd rather be looking at TikToks or Instagram or whatever. So just something to be aware of, because you may not even be intending to do that, but it's the little things that you may not notice that residents or attendings are picking up on.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
All right, I guess we can wrap up here. Luqmaan, Jazakallah khairan for giving this talk. It was very beneficial. We recorded it, so we'll put it on our YouTube channel and inshallah on the podcast as well. If anyone else has any questions about this topic or anything else, feel free to give us an email at muslimpodiatrynetwork@gmail.com. And Luqmaan, he's always available as well if you want to I don't know, maybe share your email or something. Maybe the students can reach out to you as well if they have any questions.
Yeah, of course. If anyone needs any questions for books, resources, how to study for part two, and anything like that, you can reach me on my email, Luqmaan Ahmed 97. It's LUQMAANAH, I mean MED 97 at gmail.com. Be happy to help everyone out. And Jazakallah khair for coming through on tonight.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good night.